The evening was dim, mist rolling over the plains and gently wrapping around the willow trees, their branches recoiling slightly at the chill touch. Dewdrops occasionally trickled down the leaves, hesitantly dropping from their secure ledge and onto the stiff, damp ground. The gentle breeze could be felt all around, ever present, even drifting into the nearby caverns from time to time. Long abandoned, the once functional mine shafts now served as simple lodging for wild animals and impartial entities craving darkness and security. One species in particular resided in this cavern, the Peck, fending away all who attempted to enter, be they man, machine, or otherwise. Entities of instinct, intuition, and immense curiosity, these highly territorial goblinoids kept to themselves and their families, their nocturnal minds hardly allowing them to leave their claimed land, even after the sun had set. Huddled together in this particular cavern was a group of 4 of these beings, each facing the entrance in case of intrusion. As the sun's descent into the horizon concluded, they arose from their deep slumber, rubbing their eyes and shuffling into the refreshing darkness outside. With a short burst of grunts and chatter, they split off into pairs, 2 to forage, 2 to guard. Once the first pair of foragers returned in a little while, the roles would swap, and then the spoils would be looked over. When it came time for the youngest Peck's turn to forage, he was accompanied by the eldest, shown what to take and what not to touch. Grunt, chirp, growl.
Bad.
Chirp, howl.
Good.
Howl, grunt, growl.
New.
They gathered as many objects as they could hold within their arms, be it food, shiny items, or simply things the imps were curious about. They did not take anything for themselves until the entire den got to experience it with them, and their excited, gravelly vocals resounded throughout the cave with each new discovery. The youngest had picked up an odd-looking rock. It was near water, and it felt very smooth. The others ran their hands along the shell, fingers tracing the waving edges, glinting in the fire beside the quartet, its pinkish-white exterior tinted slightly orange by the fire. All of a sudden, a claw and 2 miniature eye stalks popped out of the rock's hollow portion, pinching the final observer's hand and causing them to shake vigorously until the animal freed the poor Peck from its grasp. Instinctively suckling on its bruise, the Peck and its group slowly began to laugh together. A chorus of high-pitched, gruff yaps. They watched as the tough little crustacean waddled its way out of the cavern towards the nearby river, the group turning back to their pile of goods. After removing a couple more similar rocks, the Peck put aside the things they knew were food in a small stash, accumulating against the cave's back wall. This allowed them to focus on putting the shinies on an adjacent stack, before finally being able to fully enjoy the curiosities that they had collectively scavenged. They each took turns plucking an item from the stack and inspecting it before passing it around, roughly throwing things out of the cave that didn't seemingly do anything and setting unique treasures into a third, far shorter pile. After a couple of hours, the pile was a mere handful of items, and it was the youth's turn to choose a new object of intrigue. Before it could decide, something tugged away the Peck's attention. Something was wrong. The hair lacing its body stood on end, its mind screaming of danger and trespassers. Whipping to face the entrance, the group of goblinoids hunched their backs as they took up defensive positions, grasping anything nearby they could use as a weapon. Inspecting the newfound intruder, the Peck came to realize that they had no clue what this thing was. It hovered off the ground and shifted slowly but consistently, seemingly a multicolored blob of some sort. The group watched as the shifting form glided slowly into their abode. Hooting and hollering in an attempt to get it to leave, the Peck tribe stepped gradually closer, getting louder with every step they took and every inch this entity hovered nearer. Soon enough, the floating menace was no more than a meter away from the defensive goblinoids, who were all trying to feign attacks at this thing in a last-ditch attempt to drive it out, without making the first major move. Feeling emboldened by its earlier experience, the youngest took one extra step forward, barking louder than any of its other allies. After a few moments of no response, it lunged at the unyielding foe, rejecting the innate and blaring sense of danger, warning the imp against this action. The Peck soon discovered that this was, indeed, a horrible mistake. Almost at once, the confident grunts and growls became yelps of pain and fear as the parts of the imp making contact with the intruder began to distort and sizzle. After vainly trying to cleave apart the danger, it gave up on offense and tried to step out of the mass, only to be tripped by its own disoriented foot. With a thud and a blood-curdling screech, it was fully enveloped within the cloud. It felt its skin viscerally stretch forth from its muscles, which pushed away from its very skeleton, all too visible from the outside and immensely painful on the inside. Physical waves seemed to tear through its body as the ghastly energy coursed into its very being, its build contorting with air pockets and splaying flesh. Even as it spewed all it had eaten that night, even as it fought to get out to no avail, the pain reverberated throughout its whole body. The misery it felt wrenched its eyes wide open and forced tears to stream down trembling cheeks, mind recoiling from the constant sounds of tearing flesh and crackling bones. And then, just as soon as it had begun, it stopped. The blob drifted away in the opposite direction, and the rest of the Peck's tribe hurried to help it. Its skin was looser than before, and its limbs had been seemingly elongated on a relatively notable level, but it was still alive. Over the next few days, the lockdown on the cave became far harsher, as the Peck tribe did its best to protect their injured clanmate. Once this brief recovery period was over, it seemed as though the youngest was fully recovered, though the limb's elongation did not reverse itself. Looking up on the fourth evening after waking from its daily slumber early, the traumatized Peck saw that the pile from half a week ago had been shifted to the side. It decided to stride over to the small pile and investigate the remains left for when he'd awaken again. Picking up an overly rusted hunk of metal with oddly shaped protrusions spread evenly around its circumference. The item's title abruptly and unexpectedly resounded through its mind.
Cog! Cog!
Tilting its head and inspecting the gear, it traced its teeth with its fingers. It inspected the crevices and played with the black substance, the oil in its hands.
Oil?
Curious about his new thought, but frustrated from not being able to physically inspect it, it wiped the viscous substance on its rags, then froze. Why did it do that? Why did it wipe it off like that? Had he seen it somewhere before? It had. The big creatures that made the untakeable shinies shake and move and make noise. It heard one grunt the word when using the same dark, viscous stuff in a bucket, while working far into the goblinoid's foraging time. It had frequently rubbed the stuff on its own body, seemingly trying to get it off of its hands. Vainly trying to shake away the confusion, it picked up another object. This was an odd box.
Music!
In a sudden flash, the Peck knew what this thing did. It gave off music. It remembered the word from a younger-looking creature using a weird tool made of wood and strings on the corner of the large paths on the edge of town. People uttered the word music while passing by them many times.
What is music?
Yet again, it froze, trying to figure out an answer. After a while, with no success, it gave up on this train of thought and looked around at the fading light. Glancing a reflection of itself in a small pool, it tilted its head before pointing to itself. Reaching deep into its psyche to grab hold of whatever it had used to draw out the new words, it studied its reflection and pushed hard until it discovered an answer.
It?
In an instant, something clicked for the goblinoid. It was an it. but something about the term "it" felt not good. Wrong, even. It shook its head and tried again, pointing at itself far more intensely and pushing its brain even further. Its mind was reluctant in another answer, but it eventually gave the curious peck one.
Him? He? Me?
Silently approving, the peck grinned widely. He took to the pile, inspecting more items, before finding one that brought an odd itch into his mind. It looked like a square piece of a tree, but it was on some sort of odd hinge. A large bundle of cleanly shaped leaves were attached well inside, and feeling the cover, he realized it was protected by a layer of the same stuff he was wearing, albeit a different color.
Buck!
Recalled his mind. He heard that term practically every time he traveled near the community of the odd, tall creatures. Opening it, the young goblinoid inspected the symbols. Of course, none made sense to him, but through the images he could tell what this stuff meant to some degree. Wanting to learn more about these symbols, and wanting to satiate this itch, which was only partially removed after thoroughly inspecting the book, he decided to take a large whiff of the tomb, then sniffed the air. Past the comforting scent of his family and the cavalcade of scents lingering within the cave from all other items he'd found, he was able to identify the musty yet crisp scent in mass from that same community of tall folk. He began following the scent, leaving his territory to his family's care as he inspected the structure housing this new smell from afar. Tilting his head to ensure he was correct in the assumption, he began jogging through the thick brush and ferns in the woodlands around his home, making excellent time as he left his territory on his elongated legs. With every few steps, it seemed the world got a little bit further into night, and thus his sight began growing ever so slightly better. Eventually, the peck burst through the foliage and into a massive clearing, and was immediately awestruck by the gargantuan metal beasts around him. There were countless iron behemoths dotting the landscape, and several more structures had their skeletons half-made, beside completed lodging. Shaking himself out of his own awe, he sniffed the air again. Yes, the scent was much stronger now, but he still wasn't close enough. He'd need to walk a bit of a distance yet. The peck kept an eye out for any other creatures as he cautiously crawled through the wide, gray paths. He didn't have his family to back him up, so he was far more vulnerable right now. Luckily, though, the sun had nearly fully set, allowing him a cloak of darkness to travel within. All of a sudden, a fresh wave of the book's unique aroma drifted into the peck's nostrils, which caused him to turn his whole body to the side. There, not 50 feet away, was the exact place he'd been looking for. He crept ever nearer while holding his breath. Once he got close enough, he could see more symbols in a large hunk of wood dangled above the entrance, unfortunately unable to make out their meaning. Recalling the actions of the community's inhabitants he'd observed during his foraging times, he pushed at the doorknob. Unfortunately, he didn't know he needed to turn the handle, which caused him to snap the door's lock almost instantly. He strolled in and closed the door behind himself, as he had seen so many others do before him, before turning to inspect the countless shelves lined with literature. His insatiable curiosity led him to the decision that it would be best to read as many of these as he could before daylight could rise. First, finding a way to understand the symbols through pictures like he had in the old traveler's journal back within his cave, the peck had come to realize he could define the symbols as bits of words which he had heard before. He'd come across a book that helped to teach individuals how to read, which cleared up the bizarre language which was previously alien to him. Thanks to this, he soon realized he could pick and choose what he wanted to know about rather than read everything in a rush. He didn't need to simply get lucky with information. He inspected the books about books first, learning about how they were made, from the binding process to the idea of authors, even how the papers used within differ based on the variety of book. Once reading became easier for the peck, he ingested the knowledge from countless sources, picture books, guides, graphic novels, full novels, poetry, and everything in between, including a couple of instructional handbooks on how chroma works and how to use one's own magical capabilities. These tombs proved to be particularly complex. For instance, he had no idea what a diaphragm was, but it was apparently important to the process of casting magic. So the Peck looked for books about the diaphragm. It taught him about speech, about breathing, how humanoid anatomy worked, and the incredible potential that lies within the brain. This extended into self-discovery books, which directed him to books about various hobbies such as sports, tinkering, and boxing. Boxing led to fighting, which brought him to entertainment, followed by societal norms. The waterfall of information cascaded into his psyche, constantly flowing with new knowledge. As he kept reading, the Peck grew faster, completing sections of books within hours, then minutes. The information kept stockpiling within his mind, his knowledge accumulating and inherent links between facts suddenly clicking. At one point, he even read about traps built for magical entities like Peck, which he shuddered at upon seeing a companion image. It was something he'd seen all too often around his cave's exterior. How he'd lost his other family members.
Family?
The Peck briskly searched for books about family, guiding him to the ideas of bonds and morals, connections and kindness. He learned what it means to love and to be loved. He learned about kinship, about sympathy and empathy, which led him to psychology, which very quickly jumped to the subjects of science, math, and English. The cavalcade of epiphanies never ended, from cookbooks to nature books, hopping between newspapers and ancient scrolls. He pored over the pages, swirling in knowledge and reveling in the feeling of comprehension that never ceased. He made sure to read as fast as he could, while still retaining knowledge, the speed at which he could do so becoming staggeringly high, even compared to advanced scholars. As he picked up yet another book, this one about naming conventions in various cultures, he felt his very being finally ease into a sort of comfort at knowing so much. His instincts had been all but turned off, the distraction of abundant knowledge keeping a single, crucial fact from the Peck. The sun was rising. And that does it for the prologue, guys. I really do hope you enjoy this. This is a huge pet project of mine. I love writing, and this fantasy setting is hopefully going to come together beautifully. I'm having my friend Puffin help me out with the script so much. Check out his channel, link in the description. And I just am so hyped for this. And yes, this is getting a reboot. I made the old ones private because the old ones weren't that great. I wrote myself into a corner. But we're starting off fresh, and we're gonna get it right this time. Hope y'all enjoyed, and we'll see all of y'all beautiful people in the next episode. Goodbye!